Omar Suleiman, who's a vice president, is doing a fairly effective job of dividing the opposition.
Suleiman is a technocrat.
Western support grows for Vice President Suleiman. Massive strikes and protests roll through the streets of Cairo. 3 experts dissect tumult sweeping across Egypt in this UCLA cross-section special report on the Egyptian uprising.
Suleiman was the former head of the Mukhabarat, which is the Egyptian intelligence services. He was somebody who is a regime loyalist, has always been a regime loyalist. He's credited with having saved Mubarak's life in Ethiopia from an assassination attempt.
He's built his reputation on loyal, unquestioning service to Mubarak.
Well, the people who are on the streets and who've been trying to organize and develop some sort of a plan to take power, those people don't want to have Omar Suleiman. They don't trust him and they don't want him, and they want someone who will plausibly be able to claim he was elected through some sort of a process that looks like democracy.
Suleiman is a technocrat. He's the quintessential military man who does not think about ethical considerations, does not, I believe, understand questions of civil society and democracy. He's an efficient military man that is accustomed to doing things in backdoor channels. I mean, he was in the Pentagon when the uprising started. He has a very close ties with the United States.
The opposition, on the one hand, if they don't talk with the government, they might be shut out. On the other hand, if they do, they're pretty much being brought into the government's game. So what we have to understand about Omar Suleiman is that he's an old hand at this. He was the guy who busted the Islamists during the 1990s, and he's playing the same game now that he did then. In the 1990s, he set these guys off against each other. He did just incredible crackdown as well on a whole variety of the groups, pretty much gave them no wiggle room whatsoever. And he's doing pretty much the same thing right now. This dialogue becoming the big issue now of whether or not you're going to participate or not participate.
If he comes to power, he would do exactly what Mubarak did, and that is he would consider his primary audience to be world powers, United States, England, Israel as a country that he worries about all the time. And he would just consider his attitude towards the Egyptian people is like an attitude of a high-ranking officer towards his soldiers. They should just fall in and obey.
He was the guy in charge of the crackdown in the 1990s against the Islamist organizations. If you remember back to that time, it was an extraordinarily violent series of uprisings that were taking place, Islamist uprisings. And at the end of Suleiman's crackdown, what you had was the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt pledging no longer to participate in any form of violent activities. You had Islamic Jihad also renouncing violence as well. So he was a very, very effective head of the intelligence services.
But just because someone is a war hero doesn't mean that they understand civic society and that they are qualified to negotiate and the world of ideas and interests and compromises and so on and so forth.
We see now that the army is backing off a bit from protecting the demonstrators, that Omar Suleiman, who's a vice president, is doing a fairly effective job of dividing the opposition, dividing them around the question of, are we going to talk with the government or are we not going to talk?
These are not just poor alternatives. As far as I'm concerned, there are no alternatives at all.